They say never start a fight with someone until you know what they're capable of. The Pinecrest Gardens, HOA, should have remembered that before they blocked my driveway with 5 rusted shipping containers. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I wasn't just a quiet man with a tidy lawn. I was their landlord, and their worst mistake was waking me up. It all started on a Tuesday morning. I'd just sat down with my first cup of coffee when I glanced out the window and nearly choked. There, stacked across my driveway like some absurd urban barricade, stood 5 giant steel shipping containers. Blue, dented, ugly, tall enough to scrape the eaves of my roof, wide enough to trap my car like a mouse in a cage. It took me 2 seconds to throw on my slippers and storm outside, robe flapping in the wind. That's when I saw her, Diane Mercer. HOA president, smug smile, beige pantsuit so stiff it could stand up without her in it. "Morning, James," she called sweetly, watering her azaleas like she wasn't committing a felony. "What in God's name is this?" I asked, pointing at the wall of metal that had consumed my property. Her grin didn't budge. "The board voted to use some shared space for temporary storage, for the good of the community. Didn't you get the notice?" I hadn't, and neither had my inbox. "You can't just block someone's driveway. That's private property." She tilted her head, like I'd just asked if birds could swim. "Actually," she said, reaching into her folder and pulling out a highlighted document, Section 12.3 of the HOA guidelines states that any portion of a driveway extending into community land, by as little as 4 feet, may be subject to board use during scheduled improvement projects. She gestured toward a faint chalk mark that barely kissed the edge of my driveway. "According to our measurements, this part belongs to Pinecrest Gardens." Of course it did. I could already picture Richard and Karen, the HOA's loyal measuring squad, out here the night before with rulers and tape. "I'm calling a tow truck," I snapped. Diane's smile only widened. "You're welcome to, but any unauthorized removal of board-approved property carries a $500 fine per container." I stood there in silence, rage humming in my chest. I'd lived in Pinecrest Gardens for 5 years, paid my dues, trimmed my hedges, even repainted my mailbox after they fined me for using the wrong shade of blue. But this was no longer a rule. This was a message, and the message was clear. We own this neighborhood, and we can do whatever we want. I called my boss, told her I'd be working from home, indefinitely. Then I called every towing company in a 30-mile radius. Every single one refused to touch the containers, not without a release from the HOA. At noon, my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Patel, my neighbor across the street, holding a casserole dish and a look of genuine concern. "I saw what they did," she said quietly. "It's not right." She sat with me in the kitchen while I picked at her butter chicken, still fuming. "This isn't the first time Diane's done something like this," she continued. "Last year, the Millers got driven out after their kid put up a basketball hoop. Diane said it was an eyesore." "They left?" I asked. "Sold their house in a month. Couldn't take the pressure." I looked out the window, past the containers, past the azaleas, toward the sky. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "I've worked too hard for this house. I'm staying." And in that moment, I meant it. But I had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole went. That night, I pulled out the thick binder containing my property documents, HOA agreements, bylaws, surveys, everything. Somewhere between flipping through sub-clauses and cursing HOA language that might as well have been written in Latin, my phone buzzed. It was an email from my property manager. Subject line, monthly rent summary, Westland Commercial Holdings. I almost didn't click it. I was too busy digging through parking ordinances. But when I finally opened it, one line made me freeze. Tenant, Pinecrest Gardens, Homeowners Association, Unit 204. My eyes widened. My jaw slowly dropped. The HOA, my HOA, was listed as a tenant in a building owned by me. 8 years ago, I'd bought the Maplewood office complex through my LLC, Westland Properties. My property manager handled everything, leases, contracts, tenants. I'd never thought twice about who was in that bland little second-floor suite, until now. They'd been writing rent checks to me for nearly a decade. The very people who blocked my driveway, they worked out of my building, and in 27 days their lease was up for renewal. I set my coffee cup down gently, pulled my robe tighter, stared at the containers outside like they were dominoes already starting to fall. They thought I was just another homeowner, but they forgot to check the deed. I didn't just live in this neighborhood, I owned it. And the war they thought they were winning hadn't even started. They thought they were just irritating a homeowner. What they didn't know was they just declared war on their own landlord, and I had the receipts. The morning after I discovered the lease, I didn't get mad. I got dressed. Gone were the slippers and bathrobe. I shaved, ironed a collared shirt, and knotted a tie like it was armor, because I wasn't walking into the next HOA meeting as a neighbor. I was walking in as the man who held their keys. The 7:00 p.m. board meeting had always been a quiet affair, half-full rows, half-hearted glances. But that night the community center was packed. The container stunt had stirred more than just my rage. Neighbors whispered in clumps, pointing toward the slideshow on the projector that read, Community Enhancement Initiative, Storage Plan for Progress. Diane stood proudly at the front, flanked by Richard and Karen like generals before a battle. We've entered a wonderful partnership with Loytran Shipping, she began, clicking to a stock photo of a smiling family. Their containers will provide short-term funding, $2,000 a month, to improve our signage, install more security cameras, and reinforce community standards. By blocking a resident's driveway, someone called out. Diane didn't flinch. Mr. Reynolds' driveway extends 4.2 feet onto shared property. According to HOA bylaw 12.3, we are fully within our rights. Karen, clipboard in hand, added smugly, Measurements confirmed by Richard and myself. I stood slowly. Actually, I measured my property line this morning, I said, holding up the original survey from my title packet. It's fully on my land, Karen blinked. That can't be. I had it verified this morning, professionally, by the county. Gasps rippled through the room. Diane cleared her throat and quickly moved to the next slide, but people were no longer looking at the screen, they were looking at me, and I was just getting started. I have a question, I said, keeping my voice level. How many of you know who owns the building where our HOA office is located? There was silence, then a few puzzled murmurs. Karen frowned. It's leased through a company called Westland Something. I walked to the front, placed a business card on the table in front of Diane, and stepped back. James Reynolds, I said, CEO of Westland Properties, LLC. I've owned the building for 8 years. A hush fell over the room, so thick you could hear the air conditioner hum. You've been paying rent to me for nearly a decade, I added. And your lease renewal? It's due in less than a month. Diane looked like she'd swallowed her own gavel. Karen's hand trembled as she picked up my card and studied the logo. This changes nothing, Richard mumbled. On the contrary, I said calmly, it changes everything. After the meeting adjourned, abruptly and without Q&A, I stepped outside into the humid night. I didn't get far. Mrs. Patel caught up to me, practically buzzing with excitement. You own their office? She whispered, eyes wide. For 8 years. And they never knew? Never asked. She laughed. They tried to block your driveway. You might end up blocking their entire foundation. I smiled, but it was tight because I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Back home, I opened my laptop and started drafting new lease terms, not out of revenge, but out of reform. If they wanted to operate as a proper association, they'd have to start acting like one. So I wrote it all out, line by line. Immediate removal of the containers. Transparent elections held annually with full community oversight. Removal of punitive fines for subjective infractions. Public posting of all HOA finances. And no more secret meetings. Samantha, my lawyer, reviewed the draft the next day. You're not being petty, she said. This is the cleanest way to break a system that's gotten too comfortable abusing power. I nodded, closing the laptop. I don't want to destroy them, I said. Just wake them up. But deep down, I knew the board wasn't going down quietly. Sure enough, the next morning, I got the first message. A text from a blocked number. "This isn't over, Reynolds. You just made a powerful mistake." I stared at the screen, unmoved. They wanted to play power games? They forgot I owned the board. And soon, the board would have to face the very community they thought they controlled. The sun rose on a container-clogged driveway, and by noon, the whole country had seen it. It started with a knock on the door and a camera in my face. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Dana Sharp, Channel 8. Mind if we ask a few questions?" Before I could answer, the drone flew overhead, buzzing like an angry wasp, capturing aerial shots of 5 massive steel containers stacked in front of my garage, blocking my car, my life, my freedom. "Sources say your HOA did this," the reporter continued, gesturing to the barricade. "Is that true?" I didn't know who had tipped off the press, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone from the chaotic board meeting, but it didn't matter. The truth was already out, and once it hit the news, it went nuclear. Within hours, hashtags flooded social media. #ChatChatSauce. Containergate Nalvar HOA, horror house, free James. By the time I sat back down with my coffee, my phone was vibrating non-stop. Texts from neighbors, old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. "You're on the news. They just showed your driveway. James, what the heck is going on over there?" Even my former college roommate sent a screenshot from CNN's website. "HOA blocks driveway with shipping containers, traps resident over property line dispute." I hadn't planned for this, but I wasn't backing down either. Later that day, I got a call from Karen. Her voice was tight, coiled like a spring. "You need to make a public statement," she hissed. "This media stunt is humiliating the board." "I didn't call the press," I said calmly, "but I won't lie for you. You're making the HOA look like villains." I let that hang in the air. "If it walks like one, talks like one." She hung up. At 2 p.m., Samantha arrived at my door, my lawyer, my shield. "You've officially kicked the hornet's nest," she said, flipping open her folder. "But the good news is, public pressure makes legal negotiations a lot easier." We reviewed the HOA's lease again, line by line. Every clause, every expiration date, every loophole. "They're in breach," she confirmed. "Violation of property access, misuse of common space, and likely a fire code infraction." Just then the doorbell rang again. Mrs. Patel. She didn't even wait for me to open it before whispering, "Diane called an emergency HOA meeting for tonight. They're panicking. People are demanding financial records. Some want them removed." I stepped out onto the porch. A group of neighbors had gathered across the street, quietly talking, watching. Some waved. Some looked guilty. All of them were beginning to see the same thing. This wasn't just about containers. This was about control and the quiet abuse of it. At 7 p.m. sharp, I walked to the community center. No car, of course. The room was filled to the walls, standing room only. Residents from the next neighborhood over had even shown up. They'd seen the news too. Diane, red-faced and visibly flustered, slammed the gavel with a shaky hand. "This emergency meeting is to address recent media misrepresentations." Richard stood next to her, lips thin. Karen sat rigid, flipping through papers like a gambler holding a bad hand. "This is about community," Diane said, "not theatrics." I stepped forward. "With respect," I said, "this is about people being heard. Something this board has forgotten." Karen snapped, "You're blowing everything out of proportion. These containers are temporary and within the rules." "Which rules?" I asked. "The ones nobody voted on? The ones your friends approved in secret meetings? The ones that block fire access routes and trap residents in their own homes?" The crowd murmured. Richard tried to deflect. "We followed procedure." "No, you followed each other," I said, "and you forgot who you were supposed to serve." Then I opened the folder in my hand. "These are the revised lease terms for the HOA's office. You have 27 days. Unless this board agrees to transparency, open elections, and immediate removal of the containers, the HOA will be looking for a new home." Gasps. Karen lunged forward. "You can't do this." "I can," I replied. "Because while you've been writing fines, I've been collecting rent checks. and I think it's time we remembered what real accountability looks like. The meeting exploded. Some residents cheered, others demanded answers. Someone shouted for Diane to resign. A teenager live-streamed the whole thing. I heard the words audit, lawsuit, and mutiny more than once. And through it all, Diane sat in stunned silence, her gavel limp in her hand, because the power she thought was hers had just been reclaimed by the people. Later that night, as I walked home beneath the flicker of porch lights and summer cicadas, my phone buzzed again. A new text. "You're making enemies you don't understand. Be careful where you dig, Reynolds." I paused at my gate, looking back toward the dark silhouettes of the houses I once thought I knew. This wasn't just a turf war anymore. Someone, maybe more than one, was hiding something, and I was getting close. By the next morning, the tone had shifted. The board wasn't smug anymore. They were sweating. The night after the explosive emergency meeting, I barely slept. My phone buzzed into the early hours, neighbors sharing their stories, reporters requesting interviews, even a local podcast asking if I'd do a live segment about container tyranny. But it was Samantha's call that finally jolted me upright at 6:12 a.m. "James," she said flatly, "get dressed. Fire marshal's inspection is in 2 hours. D." Apparently, she'd filed a complaint late last night after reviewing aerial footage from the drone. Not only were the containers blocking my driveway, they were also obstructing a designated emergency vehicle route, a clear violation of city code. "They're in breach," she repeated, "and I think they know it." By 8:30 a.m., half of the neighborhood had emerged from their homes, phones in hand, quiet anticipation. Then came the white SUV with official markings. Fire Marshal Rodriguez stepped out, clipboard in hand, his brow furrowed before he even approached the property. Karen met him halfway down the sidewalk, practically jogging in heels. "These are temporary units," she said breathlessly. "Community improvement project, all approved." Rodriguez held up a hand. "I'm not here for your HOA bylaws," he said. "I'm here for fire code. And these," he gestured at the shipping containers, "are blocking emergency access to multiple homes." He pointed to the faded red markers, painted years ago onto the street, now completely covered. "No hazard placards, no permit on file. And unless you show me a variance, we've got multiple violations." Diane, who had stayed on her porch pretending to water plants, suddenly dropped the hose. "Let me guess," Rodriguez said. "You didn't get this cleared with the city." Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and swallowed hard. Rodriguez didn't wait. "You've got until 5 p.m. to begin removal, or the city will do it for you." He handed me a carbon copy of the citation, then added under his breath, "You were right to call this in. Someone's playing real fast and loose with authority." I didn't smile. Not yet. Because I knew they wouldn't go down without swinging. Sure enough, just before noon, I got another message. Anonymous number again. "Check your email. They're digging into your company now." When I opened my inbox, there it was. An unsigned tip forwarded to a local investigative blog, claiming that Westland Properties, my LLC, had suspicious acquisition patterns and possible zoning manipulations. It was vague, baseless, but dangerous. Because even a whisper of impropriety can cause damage when you're in the spotlight, and they were hoping to drag me through the mud now that their own boots were sinking. I met Samantha at my kitchen table. "I reviewed the entire portfolio last night," she said, stacking a folder thick with documentation. "Everything is legal. But, I prompted. "There's a retired real estate attorney named Gerald Keene. He used to work with the HOA. He's not on the board anymore, but emails show he's the one feeding them legal tactics, and now he's coming for you." "So it's not just Karen and Diane," I muttered. "It's deeper." "Much deeper," Samantha said grimly. "And if we're right, this wasn't just about containers. This was about intimidation, control, and maybe even money." By 3:45 p.m., the first tow truck arrived. It was almost cinematic, a bright yellow cab, hydraulic arms, chains clinking as they wrapped around the first rusted container. The crowd gathered again. Phones out. Kids on bikes watching like it was demolition day. The container lifted with a groan of steel and a cheer from someone across the street. I saw Richard watching from his front window, face pale, fists clenched. He wasn't in control anymore, and he knew it. Just before the second container was lifted, Mrs. Patel stepped beside me. "They thought they could silence us," she said quietly. "They forgot whose name is on the deed," I replied. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. And for the first time in days, the space in front of my garage, my driveway, was visible again. It felt like breathing, like freedom, like a crack of light under a heavy door, finally opening. But as the last container rolled away, something in me twisted, because I knew this wasn't their last move, not with Gerald still in the shadows, not with secrets buried in HOA paperwork I hadn't seen yet, and not with a system that had thrived on fear for far too long. That night, I found a flash drive taped to my mailbox. No name, no note, just a label written in ballpoint pen. "Start with Diane's email folder." They thought moving the containers would end it, but that was just the surface. The real rot ran deeper, beneath the meetings, the bylaws, the manicured lawns, and someone had just handed me the key. The flash drive sat on my desk like a loaded gun. No label beyond the handwritten scrawl, "Start with Diane's email folder." Samantha arrived within the hour. "You trust this?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I don't even know who sent it." "Then we scan it first." We ran a digital sweep. No malware, no viruses. Just folders. Hundreds of them. Invoices, board emails, internal memos. And at the center, a folder titled Priority Targets. Inside were names, 27 to be exact, residents from Pinecrest Gardens and 2 other neighborhoods nearby. Next to each was a dossier: age, income, family status, work schedules, medical conditions, even photographs of their homes. Notes like, "Too old to fight it," "Spouse deceased, emotionally vulnerable," "Working night shifts, won't see notices," "Out-of-state daughter, no local support," and next to my name, "Owns LLC, keeps a low profile, doesn't attend meetings, driveway crosses HOA boundary, perfect test case." My chest tightened. This wasn't just overreach, it was a system. A weaponized HOA bureaucracy targeting the vulnerable, one property at a time. Then we found the shell companies: Westgate Holdings, Magnolia Mediation, Quiet Oak LLC, all fronts, and all, somehow, connected to one name: Gerald Keene, retired attorney, former HOA consultant, unofficial advisor to Diane. Samantha leaned back in her chair, stunned. "He's been flipping houses using forced infractions," she said. "Using the HOA to push people out, then buying the properties through third parties, renovating, flipping, profiting." And no one stopped it? Because they never knew. Until now. Later that night, I emailed the contents to the state's housing fraud division. I also made copies for myself, one on the cloud, one on a flash drive I duct-taped under my porch swing. Paranoia? Maybe, but justified. Because the next morning, someone broke into my mailbox. They didn't steal anything, just left something. A note, sharp black ink, folded carefully. "We warned you, if you keep digging, we'll bury you in it." My hands trembled, not from fear, from anger. That night, I sat down with my neighbors. A real meeting. No gavels, no rules, no secrets. We met in Mrs. Patel's backyard, folding chairs around citronella candles. It felt more like a campfire than a coup. I laid it out. Everything. The files, the targeting, the profits, the manipulation. When I finished, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Marcus, a quiet vet who'd lived here 20 years, stood up. "They came after my wife over our porch railing," he said, voice shaking. "Said it was too wide. Cost us $4,000 to replace. I thought it was just nitpicking. But now, I think they were trying to make us leave." Others began to nod. "I got fined for putting a garden bench out front," said a woman near the back. said it disrupted the neighborhood aesthetic. They even sent someone to take photos. Elena, the young nurse with the rainbow flag on her porch, stood last. They ripped mine down twice, called it an unauthorized banner. I cried the second time. I felt like maybe I didn't belong. But now, we weren't alone, we were awake. The next morning, I received a formal letter from the HOA. It was a cease and desist, accusing me of defamation, threatening legal action if I continued spreading lies. I held it up to the sunlight, then I lit it on fire in my grill. If they wanted a war, they picked the wrong man. The news broke 2 days later. Retired attorney linked to HOA property scandal. Investigators say dozens of homeowners targeted in coordinated takeover scheme. The images were damning. Gerald caught on camera walking into city zoning offices. Karen seen slipping documents to contractors. A trail of emails and shell companies tied together by Samantha's airtight research. Channel 8 called me again. Would you like to go on record? I nodded. It's not just about containers, I told them. It's about what happens when power forgets it's supposed to serve, not rule. By nightfall, Gerald had gone dark. Karen deactivated her Facebook. Diane canceled the next board meeting, then quietly submitted her resignation to the HOA management company. But we weren't finished, because this wasn't just about exposure, it was about rebuilding what they tried to tear apart. The storm had passed, but the air still crackled. Not from fear anymore, but from readiness. The HOA board had scattered like leaves in the wind. Diane was gone. Karen had vanished into silence. Richard hadn't shown his face since the fire marshal ordered the last container removed. But the wounds they left, still fresh. Not in my driveway, in people's trust. That's when Mrs. Patel knocked on my door. She wasn't carrying casserole this time. She held a clipboard, and a spark in her eyes. We're not going back to how things were, she said simply. So we're starting fresh. We gathered again, this time in my backyard, under a string of old cafe lights and the soft hum of cicadas. No chairs at the front, no podium, just neighbors on folding seats, sitting shoulder to shoulder with the people they once only waved to politely from across the street. There were young families, veterans, retirees like Mrs. Johnson from Lot 42. Even Marcus's teenage daughter came, earbuds half in, quietly doodling in a notebook, but present. We didn't call it a meeting. We called it what it was, a reckoning. The first thing we did was tear the old rulebook apart. Literally. Karen had once printed it on thick parchment paper like it was the Constitution. Now, page by page, we rewrote what it meant to live in Pinecrest Gardens. Fines for mailbox colors? Gone. Infractions for potted plants too close to the curb? Gone. Restrictions on flags, flower beds, garden benches, holiday wreaths? All gone. In their place, we drafted something better. Resident-led voting for all future rules. Annual open elections with rotating board positions. Transparency on all finances, published monthly. Community-based conflict resolution, not threats, not fines. And a clause that no rule may be enforced without majority consent. Samantha, who'd agreed to advise the new structure pro bono, smiled as she helped Mrs. Patel type it up. We're not just writing rules, she said. We're writing protection from power, from abuse, from becoming them. We called it the Charter of Pinecrest Gardens. Elena's partner, a graphic designer, offered to format and print it in large, friendly font for everyone's fridge. Nothing that needs a magnifying glass, she joked, earning a round of laughs from the seniors. And in the center of the document, in bold, it said, "This is your home, not their playground." Within days, the changes started blooming like spring. Mrs. Johnson finally painted her porch lavender, just like she'd wanted for 10 years. Elena rehung her pride flag, twice the size, and nobody said a word. A young couple built a mini free library box by the walking trail. Someone else planted sunflowers by the storm drain. The Millers, who'd been fined into leaving 2 years ago, sent a postcard from Vermont. It read, We heard what you did. You saved our neighborhood. Even if we're not there anymore, thank you. But perhaps the biggest moment came 2 weeks later. We held a vote, not just to approve the new charter, but to elect a new HOA board. And this time, people ran not out of ego, but out of duty. Mrs. Patel became president unanimously. Elena took secretary, Marcus treasurer. Even Gerald's niece, who'd lived quietly in his guest house and despised what he did, offered to join as a general board member. I want to undo the damage he caused, she said, from inside. As for me, I declined the offer to run. I'm not interested in power, I told them. Just peace, and my driveway back. The room laughed, but then they stood, all of them, and they clapped. Not because I'd fought the HOA, but because we'd fought for each other. That night, as I walked past my once barricaded driveway and into my quiet home, I paused by the mailbox, the new mailbox. It was deep red, slightly taller than regulation height, and for the first time in years, it didn't matter. No warnings, no citations, just a handwritten note inside. Thank you for showing us what home is supposed to feel like. Not every storm ends when the sky's clear. Some linger in the silence that follows. And sometimes, the loudest moment comes from the sound of a knock. It was a warm afternoon in late spring. The roses by the fence were in bloom again, and I was cleaning out the gutter when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there she was. Karen. Not the woman who once stormed through HOA meetings with a clipboard and a scowl. Not the woman who fined neighbors over gnome height or flagged flower pots as non-compliant. This Karen looked smaller. No heels, no pearls, no clipboard. Just a cardigan, jeans, and eyes that didn't quite meet mine. I thought you moved, I said. I did, she replied. But I kept the lot next door. Been renting it out, quietly. I didn't respond. She cleared her throat, then held out something wrapped in a linen towel. Cookies, she said. My grandmother's recipe. I figured it was time. I took the bundle without a word. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then slowly I asked, "Why are you really here, Karen?" She looked away, watching a squirrel dart up a tree. I watched what happened, from a distance, the rebuild, the new charter, the gardens. Her voice caught. You turned it into a place people love again. I said nothing. I was wrong, she whispered. About all of it. About what power meant. About how I treated people. About who I became. I looked at her, really looked. There was no smugness, no hidden motive, just regret. When did it change for you? I finally asked. Karen's eyes glistened. My sister came to visit. She hadn't been here in years. We were drinking coffee on the porch and I made some snide comment about a neighbor's mailbox. She stared at me and said, "You sound like a prison warden, not a homeowner." Karen swallowed. She didn't stay the night. That's when I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore. It would have been easy to turn her away, to remind her of the fines, the containers, the years she made people feel small in their own homes. But I didn't. Because something had shifted. In her, in me, in all of us. And maybe that was the real victory. That weekend, Karen showed up to the community cleanup with gardening gloves and a folding chair. She didn't lead. She didn't delegate. She pulled weeds, painted fences, and helped Elena organize donations for the neighborhood tool share. No fanfare, no speech, just presence. Mrs. Patel handed her a cup of lemonade at one point and whispered something in her ear. Karen smiled, faint but real. But forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a series of quiet choices. It's listening instead of assuming. It's showing up, even when no one's asked you to. It's planting tomatoes in the same garden you once tried to bulldoze. Karen did all of it. Little by little, people stopped looking over their shoulders when she approached. Elena even let her hang streamers before the summer block party. I still don't trust her completely, she said to me later, but I see she's trying. That counts for something. It did. And Richard? He resurfaced eventually, too. not in a board meeting, but behind a wheelbarrow, hauling compost to the new community garden. He didn't say much, just nodded when people walked by. But he was there, not for power, not for control, just to help. And sometimes, that's enough. That summer, we held a picnic in the park where the old HOA office used to send out those nasty newsletters. We grilled burgers, played music, and someone brought a karaoke machine that got more use than anyone expected. Karen sang, badly, but she laughed at herself. When she handed me a second cookie from her grandmother's tin, she said something I'll never forget. I used to think control made a community stronger. Turns out it just makes it smaller. And for the first time I believed her, because redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about what you choose to plant in its place. The containers were long gone, but what they left behind, that was just beginning to bloom. A year after they tried to box me in, I stood under the same sun, but the view had changed. No more boardroom battles, no more measuring tape wars, no more mailbox violations or garden gnome crackdowns. Just children laughing by the tool shed we'd turned into a mini lending library. Just Mrs. Patel teaching her secret chutney recipe to two teenage boys who once got fined for sidewalk chalk. Just neighbors, real neighbors, talking to each other, not talking around each other. And me, I was exactly where I belonged. That morning, I opened the new community newsletter, printed on recycled paper, folded by hand, and delivered door-to-door by volunteers. The headline read, "From HOA to Home, How We Took Back Pinecrest Gardens." Below it were stories. One from Marcus about the PTSD support group that now met weekly at the community center. One from Elena about how her kids had helped paint the crosswalk signs in rainbow colors with board approval. Even one from Karen titled "Why I'm Still Learning," where she talked openly about her past mistakes and what it meant to rebuild trust instead of enforce control. After lunch, I walked through the old garden path behind the east cul-de-sac, where 5 shipping containers once sat like silent threats, now stood a pollinator flower garden, raised vegetable beds named after residents who helped build them, and an open-air pavilion with benches carved from reclaimed wood. At the center stood a small engraved plaque, planted by the people, for the people, who wouldn't be pushed aside. And then something unexpected. A delivery truck pulled up in front of my house. The driver stepped out, clipboard in hand. "James Reynolds?" "That's me." He handed me a long, narrow box. Inside was a hand-carved wooden sign. Burned into its surface were the words, "You own more than the building. You built the roots." From your neighbors. For the first time in a long time, I sat on my porch swing and cried. Not from frustration, not from exhaustion, but from knowing that something good had taken hold, and it was growing. As the sun dipped low and the cicadas began their chorus, Mrs. Patel sat beside me with her teacup. She smiled. "It's funny, isn't it?" "What is?" She sipped. "How they tried to trap you, and instead you set everyone free." I looked out over the houses, still imperfect, still unique, and finally allowed to be both. "Funny," I said, "and exactly right." The old HOA sign now hung above the new community room, its gold lettering repainted by the kids. Below it, someone had added a second sign, "Homeowners with Heart." That night, I locked up my house, stepped into my reclaimed driveway, and took one final look at what we'd built. Not just buildings, not just bylaws, but belonging. They blocked my driveway. They tried to bury me in rules, in fines, in fear, in silence, but they forgot something. You can tow a car, you can fence a garden, you can even drop a shipping container in front of someone's home, but you can't block truth. You can't bulldoze resilience. And you sure as hell can't contain community. This wasn't just about one house or one man. It was about what we all deserve. To wake up in a neighborhood that feels like home. To plant roses without permission, to paint porches purple, to raise our grandkids on streets filled with laughter, not fear of citations. Too many people, especially older ones like me, are told to stay quiet, to avoid making waves, to just pay the fine and move on. But we've spent a lifetime building what matters, and we've earned the right to protect it. So if someone tries to push you off your land or shame you into silence or weaponize the rules to control your life, stand your ground. Stand with your neighbors. Stand with your history. Stand with every root you've planted, every board you've nailed, every dollar you've paid into your soil. Because when we fight for our homes, we're not just protecting property, we're protecting the idea that where we live should never cost us who we are. Thank you for watching. If you've ever felt powerless in your own neighborhood, share this. You're not alone, and you're not finished, not even close.